So good morning, everyone, if you're in WA or Adelaide, otherwise good afternoon. And welcome to today's panel discussion on AI and high-performance computing and how we're accelerating health innovation in Australia. So I'm your MC for today. I'm Dr. Sarah Beecroft, a life sciences supercomputing specialist at the Pawsey Supercomputing Research Centre based here in Perth. And I'm really delighted to be your host for this important conversation. I'm really looking forward to it. We've got some great panelists, and I think it's going to be very interesting. So I'm joining you today from Perth, and I would like to acknowledge the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation as the traditional owners of the land from which I'm broadcasting and where we work. And I pay my respects to elders past and present. So as we gather in the week around World Health Day, it's a really timely opportunity to explore how cutting-edge computational technologies are transforming healthcare research and clinical practice across Australia. So today's discussion brings together experts working at the intersection of health, artificial intelligence, and high-performance computing, or HPC, to share insights on how these tools are accelerating discovery and improving patient outcomes. So at Pawsey, we recognise the transformative potential of AI and HPC in healthcare. So as one of Australia's leading national supercomputing facilities, we provide world-class computational power, data services, and expertise to support researchers tackling these complex challenges, everything from medical imaging to genomics to drug discovery, personalised medicine, all sorts of areas. So our supercomputer is called Photonics. It's named after the genus name for quokka. So this is Australia's greenest and most powerful research supercomputer. It's also one of the country's most advanced GPU systems, delivering the computational backbone for transformative AI applications. So GPUs are essential for AI workloads. And Photonics features 768 GPU nodes in total, which is enormous. So there's 8 individual GPUs on each of those nodes. So this really enables researchers to push the boundaries of innovation in healthcare and beyond. So for today's session, we will refer to AI in a broad sense, focusing on how artificial intelligence in high-performance computing enables researchers to extract insights from massive data sets at really an unprecedented speed. You'll hear about machine learning, obviously a branch of AI that identifies patterns in data, which also includes deep learning, a specialized subset that employs neural networks with multiple layers. So interestingly, these neural networks were inspired by the structure of the human brain, and they're simplified computational models consisting of interconnected nodes organized into layers. They excel at processing and learning from vast amounts of data, making them particularly effective for complex tasks such as protein structure prediction, image recognition, natural language processing, and predictive modeling. It's really important to remember that AI is not magic. It's built on data, algorithms, human decisions, and it's been used in scientific computing for a long time, and it continues to evolve as a powerful tool in research. So today, we're going to showcase real-world applications, discuss emerging opportunities, and explore how national computing infrastructure like Pawsey's can strengthen Australia's leadership in AI-driven healthcare. So just a few housekeeping notes. This session is being recorded and will be available after the event. We've allocated 20 minutes for Q&A at the end of the session, and you're invited to submit your questions through the chat or turn your camera on and ask them during the dedicated Q&A portion. You can also use the chat for technical issues or to share relevant resources. So that's enough from me. Let's meet our panelists. So I'll introduce them briefly. We have Dr. Thomas Drake-Brockman, Dr. Saskia Freytag, and Dr. Shiv Meka. So, Thomas, you bring a unique perspective as both a medical doctor and trained computer scientist at Perth Children's Hospital. Could you tell us a bit about your background and the current work you're doing in the intersection of AI and paediatric medicine?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Sarah. It is an interesting background, I'm told. I frequently get people saying that's an odd way to come to medicine, which I find a little disappointing because so much of what we do in medicine, as well as many other fields, relies heavily on computers, increasingly on computers. And I think there's a very strong desire among much of the medical profession to really understand their tools, unless those tools are computers, in which case then they are black box, mysterious, and should not be talked about too much. I think that's somewhat reducing at the moment, but certainly a surgeon will tell you that they know many, many things about scalpels, but doctors who rely on AI might be happy to accept that they don't know how it works on the inside. I became a doctor after doing my undergraduate degree in computer science. I think because I felt a need to be able to influence change for people one at a time in a more tangible way than I might have been able to achieve by becoming a software engineer full-time and working in that field. But I have found that skill set, which I really feel is actually just a kind of form of literacy, has become fantastically helpful in my career. I do research at Perth Children's Hospital. We have we work with Photonics. We also have Merlin, which is our in-house high-performance computing platform for sensitive child health data, and we're doing some really exciting work in spaces like risk prediction, with lay summary generation, making a plethora of documents and policies much more accessible to members of our team and the clinical workforce. It's all good and well for the hospital to have a policy on how to manage bleeding after tonsillectomy, but can you lay your hands on that policy when you need it? But if you can make sure that if you have an AI system which is trained and uses retrieval to produce reliable outputs in relation to questions like, what should I do with this hemorrhage? Then that is a whole different level of usability. So we're kind of at the position where there's really exciting technology out there, but making it accessible, making it understandable, and making it safe is some of the challenges that we're facing.
Thank you. Yeah, it's incredibly interesting, the work you're doing. And I completely agree. Having the strong understanding of the computational systems and what you can do with them is hugely important. Healthcare is only going to become more digital. It's not going backwards, hopefully, to handwritten notes that nobody can read or access, right? So
you do get quite good at reading difficult handwriting after a while, but and pharmacists are par excellence. However, it's sorry, someone's just trying to call me.
Life of a doctor.
It can be like that sometimes. I actually have to pretend that I don't know how computers work a lot of the time, because people sometimes mistake the background of computer science as being a background in IT support, which is not something I try and provide day to day. Try and provide perhaps slightly deeper insight.
Yeah, I can imagine. Thank you. So Saskia, as a computational biologist at the WEHI, or Walter and Eliza Hall Institute, as it was formerly called, you're applying advanced computing to all sorts of biological challenges. Could you share your journey and maybe the focus of your current research?
Yes, thanks for having me, first of all. So by training, I'm actually a statistician, which is quite fortunate because I'm sure, as all of you know, statistics is the backbone of all of AI. So that has actually set me up quite well. So I did my undergraduate in statistics, and then having never touched biology since sort of year 10, I became really fascinated with the idea of what statistics could provide to the analysis of biological data, and then was fortunate enough to do a PhD in what was at the time like a really hot area called statistical genetics, where we were trying to identify population-based variants that were conferring disease risk. So for really common diseases such as diabetes or even lung cancer. And while that was really fascinating, I thought it was still very, very statistics heavy and not very biology based. And so I've tried in my career to move further and further away from the computations, probably much like Thomas, and more towards the patient. And so I in my postdoc, I then started really looking at gene expression rather than just population-based variants, and became really fascinated with the expanding field of omics and just all the different biological activities that we can measure using next-generation sequencing techniques. That also, combined with my fascination of the human brain, really then led me to Western Australia, where I was in a lab studying the normal maturation of the human brain and how that is regulated. And then I was able to convert that experience into a lab head position at the WeHi, where I'm now really fortunate to lead a lab with 2 other people, a clinician who is a neuro-oncologist and a cancer biologist. And together we have a team focusing on brain cancer and really trying to move the needle there, because in 20 years we haven't really made any progress for patients in brain cancer, and they're still being treated with the exact same protocol, like standard of care protocols that they've seen 20 years ago. And so it's not surprising that survival hasn't really moved for them. And in this endeavor, I guess the lab is kind of set up to really go from bench to bedside, which I'm really proud of, because we've only been established for 3 years now. So what we're trying to do is really learn from basic biology and just learn about really the architecture of these very, very aggressive tumors, how they are spatially built up, and then learn on what from that we can take in order to build better medicines. And that's our sort of second pillar of the lab, where we're actually trying to see what types of combination treatments might actually improve the current standard of care for these patients. And then really, really excitingly, at the end, we have clinical trials where we are hopefully in the future taking some of the learnings we had from the new therapeutics into actual clinical trials. At the moment, we're just doing other clinical trials, and then study the patients later on again and see what changed when we actually gave them treatment, again, using all of these omics technologies that I have become so familiar with. So I guess that's sort of the lab and what I do, and I guess my path. And also, I'm sure you can see that there's a lot of touch points for AI in the journey as well as in the current research that I'm doing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really interesting to hear how you've, in some ways, changed fields, but in many ways, not changed fields at all, with this really strong statistical underpinning. I'm always amused when people say, "Oh, AI," and like a lot of it is really just statistics, which is somehow seen as less exciting, but I think incredibly important. I like statistics, although I'm not very good at it. It's quite, yeah, it's an incredible skill set, and I love that you've managed to really make that extremely translational. My friend's mum died from brain cancer in her 60s, and it's hugely important what you're doing, and having this direct impact on patients' lives is a huge deal. So I'm really glad you could join us and apply all of what you've learned and picked up to this incredibly interesting but difficult problem.
Yeah, thank you. No, it's a devastating disease, and I'm hopeful that, our new technologies and AI together can really make a step forward for patients here.
Yeah, absolutely. If anyone can do it, it's you, Saskia. So, and so Shiv, we were joking before the panel that everyone at Pawsey will brag about Shiv to anyone that will stand still long enough with all the incredible work he's doing. So Shiv is you're the chief data scientist at Royal Perth Hospital, but you're doing incredible work bringing AI applications directly into clinical settings. So Shiv, could you tell us a bit about your background and the key initiatives you're currently leading?
First of all, thanks so much, Karina, Aditi, and Sarah, for having me on this panel. My journey actually started off, and my parents are both doctors, and seeing how busy they are, I never wanted to be a doctor or to do anything to do with healthcare. But then, as destiny would have it, I started my bachelor's in electrical engineering, and then I studied in the US. I moved to go to quantum transport, and then worked in Cleveland Clinic for a while, and then came here to Perth thanks to Donald Trump's first term, and then I was in Curtin for a while. I was doing machine learning in engineering, and then COVID struck us, and I thought I need to do something. Like every one of us, each of us actually wanted to do something, right, during that time. So I joined Department of Health as a lead data scientist, and then I'm here at Royal Perth working closely with clinicians. So you see the space here, it's kind of pretty rustic because when Hive started, so what Hive is like, it's virtual monitoring of patients. So if there's patients that's about to deteriorate, we intervene and hopefully prevent the deterioration. Not every time, but that's the hope. And this Hive initiative started like 4 years back, like in 2021, and they didn't have a space here in Royal Perth. So there's a storeroom here on the top floor. And they said, why don't you use this? And this is where we have our Hive monitoring. Come August, I think we'll be the first virtual hospital in WA. So it'll be a separate entity on its own. It won't be part of Royal Perth. It'll be a hospital that's all virtual. So my apart from deterioration and use of large language models, we also build wearables, because a lot of times when we give out, say, Fitbits or gadgets to patients, we actually don't get them back. So we started building our own wearables in-house. And as we go along in the panel discussion, I'll mention a couple of projects. But Pawsey has been a savior for us for almost every kind of project that we do. There's a Pawsey footprint.
That's great to hear. And we're really happy to support the work that you're doing. It's really incredible, some of the things that you developed. So I'm really looking forward to hearing more about it throughout the panel. It's really incredible. And so the US's loss is definitely our gain having you here. So I have a question for all the panelists to get us rolling. So from your perspective, what are the most significant ways AI and high-performance computing are currently changing healthcare research or clinical practice in Australia? Anyone?
I'm happy. Yeah.
You go. Thomas?
Yeah, I'm happy to go, for sure. Look, I think in terms of actual delivery of healthcare right now, perhaps the most, or at least the most obvious place that a patient's going to bump into AI is in their GP's office. There's dramatically increasing use of AI scribes. And this is good for both patient and doctor, in my opinion, because it means more time speaking face-to-face, less time doing the thing that everyone hates, including patients, which is typing. And having used some of these scribes, actually not infrequently things that are easy to forget that you talked about 20 minutes ago are picked up either in a transcript or it's sometimes included in the summary as well. And I think this is probably also one of the more sort of obvious applications of AI in healthcare at the moment, because it's a Gen AI, right? Which is what the public's perception of AI is right now, I feel. People think AI is new. It's not. If you had an anesthetic in the last decade, then probably the chance of you waking up was predicted by a machine learning algorithm during that procedure, something called BIS. But this is probably the first time you've actually seen an output generated associated with your healthcare in front of you during your healthcare episode. And I think that this is a really interesting time in working out what the public feel about, particularly that level of visibility of AI in their care. And it's something we're exploring at Perth Hospital around, well, what do children think about that? And what do parents think about that as well? Are they accepting of that? And because we now have these Gen AI tools, while we've been doing sort of like, asynchronous communication with patients and families by SMS, for example, for a while, there's some opportunities to make that experience a lot better, a lot more tailored, a lot more responsive, and potentially safer as well, because there's always a risk that if you send someone a message, they'll send you back some information. And if you don't have it, some sort of entity on the other end of that phone line that can do something with the information, then you have this sort of black hole risk as well. So I think that's probably like one of the biggest ways that this is impacting the delivery of healthcare at the very front line right now. And I'm expecting that's going to extend to the extent that it hasn't already into the sort of front line inside hospitals as well. So you'll probably see this with your GP now, but I wouldn't be surprised if end of this year, sometime next year, hospital clinics, hospital emergency departments are using hospital ward rounds, even beginning to use these kinds of tools in their day-to-day delivery of healthcare, which I think we do need to actually take the moment to ask patients about what they feel about this. We shouldn't just assume that this is something we can go full tidal wave with. I love technology, but I acknowledge that it's not always what people want their care to look like. So it's important that we design the healthcare experience as well as just implement technology at the same time.
Yeah, interesting. Very topical as well. Saskia or Shiv, do you have?
Yeah, so I'm gonna take it from the not from the healthcare perspective, but from the research angle. So I guess AI has really made us much, much faster. And I'll give you two examples for why that is. The first one is maybe something you might have heard about. It's AlphaFold. AlphaFold is a tool that can predict protein folding. And that's really enabled us to much more rapidly go towards drug design that previously would have had to include a lot of very, very complex experiments that need very, very large structures to be able to be done. So I guess that's one thing where it's been amazing to have an AI tool that has such great predictive ability, where we really, I mean, obviously we do need to do checking, but it has made things much, much faster and has ruled out certain things before we started experiments. So that's been really great. And then I guess the other one is really obvious. I mean, we all are probably using some form of generative AI to enhance our writing. For many of us scientists, writing takes is a lot of our work life these days. And so just having a partner that in this writing and in research that is much more intuitive to use than your sort of Google search that you were previously using, I think has just increased speeds and means that our output can be, well, not maybe tenfold, but twofold potentially.
Which is a huge speed up. If you're able to cut short experiments or avoid experiments that you don't need, and also, yeah, definitely the writing support is huge. And ChatGPT or whatever never gets tired of you asking it questions, unlike your PI. So that's nice. Shiv, do you have a comment as well?
I was more interested in agentic formulations, wherein you ask it to solve a problem. It has its own agent, which actually uses LLMs. So it could be coding, it could be using research agent. Agents are just tools, right? So one of the agent that we built here, which had kind of limited success, but it's improving a lot, is what is called grant writer agent. So all that you need is if you have any of the health grants, you just upload the grant. It does the research for you. You just have to specify the topic, it gets all the references. And if you have lack of topics, you ask it to create its own. And then you spam the grant agency with all your grants. But that's where it's kind of heading to. You can have your own little side project where you're predicting, say, deterioration of a patient, or but getting that to scale is a different challenge, because couple of patients versus whole of hospital, that's a different scale that we're talking about, because 1 or 10 seconds of execution time, I mean, times that with 1,000 patients, and the compute quickly, I mean, goes off in a hurry. So that's where HPC kind of kicks in. So if you if you have a nice architecture of how your models are, how you kind of orchestrate them, and how you inference them, and that's a strategic thing. And I don't think there's something like Pawsey in Perth, because every time there's also issues of governance, wherein your data goes off to another state, and something that the ethics may not write. But having it local, processing it locally, and it's just like a stone's throw from Royal Perth, and that gives you scale. And also you can try, I mean, the agentic formulation. So you have, say, 100 doctors have 100 different experiments, computational experiments that they want to run. So what an ideal agent would do is, if you're asking it to build a sepsis prediction model, the one agent may use, say, your hospital data or a free data source. And no two agents are the same. So one can get you a better result than the other. And for these agents, the GPU power is only going to increase over time, because that agentic way of solving problems is only, we have seen this chat GPT one-off thing wherein you fire a question and you get a response back. But agent is more of an ecosystem. So you have a doctor, you have a LLM acting as a doctor. You have a machine learning engineer, which is a role play by the same LLM. But then they interact like in a company. And then you have a product at the end of the day. And if I'm allowed to show, I can show you something which was built in 16 minutes. Can I share my screen?
Sure.
Is it fine?
I think so. Karina?
Yes, you can.
So, so what you see here is a Fitbit app. Like, you can sync your Fitbit vitals, okay? And you have admin controls and dashboards. You can send SMS messages. And all this, you know how long it took to build this? It took like 20 minutes.
Wow, that's insane.
And all that you needed to do was ask it to build a Fitbit management portal. And that's where it's headed to.
So how long would that have taken without an agentic?
So we had a similar, not this good-looking interface, where we used it for trialing mental health patients to predict risk of dementia, and that took 6 months.
Wow, that's incredible.
So, and that's my take on where it's headed to. I think it's going to be agentic.
Yeah, it's a really interesting area. And it has a lot of implications for the future of work, I think, as well, which is maybe outside of the scope of this discussion, but it's really far-reaching.
So I think there's also really an interesting point about the future of grants to be had as well, given that we can now generate 1,000 grant applications in the afternoon. I was chatting to an academic from Notre Dame the other day who knows that the medical students in essays, it's the end of essays at universities, right? And so they're just going to do a lot more Vivas, a lot more OSCEs, a lot more practical assessment. And I think, actually, to be honest, the teachers actually prefer that half the time, because reading 2,000 words on diabetes is dull. But I think we're already seeing more and more uploaded video with your application, or a lot more interviews. And I think that's just going to escalate. So I think it's going to end up being that everything's a pitch. And I know that you can also AI a fake video, but I think they'll probably say you're not allowed to do that. But I think we might see the end of 30-page grant applications, and that might be a good thing for all of us, actually, but it will be a painful adjustment for the grant bodies.
Yeah, I mean, it's changing the paradigm, really.
But sorry, if I can chime in.
Yeah.
But where it's headed to is also totally different from what we've been doing for the last 300 years. So if you guys get a chance to visit Royal Perth, there's a museum. It's about how clinical practices were in, say, 1800s. And if you see what it's been done today, a lot of it is similar because we still use paper and pen to write like demographics and all that. But what we are geared towards is what is called preventative medicine, precision medicine. Even before an event happens, an AI would prevent, hopefully, and prevent a deterioration from happening. That's a whole new landscape. And we'll need a lot more clinical trials to see the efficacy of whether having that preventative approach is good in a clinical setting. But that's all possible just because of AI.
Yeah, wow. In a way that just wasn't before. Something that my old boss Nigel Lang used to say was the current medical model is you start with a sick person, and so his pitch was like preventative genetic screening, right? Preventing these kids being born with really terrible diseases that they're not going to survive. Let's cut that out. And getting the buy-in for that could actually be quite difficult because it's changing the way people think about how they practice medicine, right? And so this is kind of a similar thing, like shifting from you starting with a sick person to how can we prevent this or how can we optimize their health, which sounds like is necessary because our health budget is constrained, but the number of people is not. So yeah, it's a really interesting. So it's so interesting. I wish we had longer to discuss it all, to be honest. I can get you all over to Perth and have a further chat about it maybe. But we do have some more questions. So this one was specifically for Saskia. So how is AI changing our approach to genomics and personalized medicine? And what role do you think supercomputing plays in that particular transformation?
Yeah, so I guess for those of you who are maybe not as familiar with personalized medicine, it's the idea that your biological, like any sort of biomarker would indicate what type of medicine would work best for you. And the key to all of this is very large cohorts that you have to start out with, where you have good data on how the patients did. So you have large amounts of biological measurements and large amounts of outcome data. You marry the two things and you find groups that do particularly well on a treatment or do particularly poorly on a treatment. And then you can stratify, and then the idea would be when a new patient comes in, the biomarkers that you now know, you measure them, you can then stratify those patients into a group and say, okay, you are going to go on therapy X or Y. So obviously by, just the words large amounts of data, trying to find groups should alert you that this is all AI based really. So that's really where personalized medicine is going. And obviously supercomputers have like a really big role to play here in building these models in particular. I think the most fascinating example of this that I've that's like a brain cancer example is the application of the Heidelberg classifier. So the Heidelberg classifier is our way to basically make very accurate diagnostic decisions on brain cancer patients. So because they are basic brain cancer is a really heterogeneous group of diseases with loads and loads of different types. So it can be really hard when the neurosurgeons take out a tumor to actually know what that patient has. And so it turns out that a little alteration on your DNA called methylation is very, very predictive of what type of brain cancer you have when you can get tumor material. So that was so the Heidelberg classifier developed in Heidelberg is something that that's been used in the field, and it's an AI machine that's actually about, I think it's about 7 years old already to this point. But the cool thing that we're now doing with this Heidelberg classifier is actually applying new technology in the next generation sequencing space that is much faster, and being able to predict interoperatively what type of brain cancer a person may have. And the way that that's possible is by marrying cool technology that comes into the wet lab with with AI technology that we have. And really, to make this sort of like salient for the audience, the difference that means is whether a patient gets a diagnosis in 2 weeks or whether a patient has to wait up to 6 months to get a diagnosis for what brain cancer they have, with potentially life-altering changes, right? Sometimes we will tell our brain cancer patients that they have a horrible, horrible brain cancer and might potentially won't live to see the like end of the year. And then it turns out that that predictor comes back and says, actually, we got it wrong. The pathologist got it wrong and sorry, you have a benign tumor, you'll be fine. So that's really the difference that we're talking here. We can give patients a lot of peace of mind, and we can allow them to plan their lives.
That's amazing. That's incredible. And you can imagine if you get this turnaround, like actually you've got a benign tumor, like that's just a huge outcome for that person.
Yeah, exactly.
Or knowing what you have, like even if you can't do anything about it, having some idea of what it is can be really important, as what I've observed, right? With rare disease patients, for example.
Yeah. And you coming from the rare disease world would appreciate this. Like, yes, often we can't actually provide patients with different treatments, but just having that peace of mind, knowing where the disease comes from, it gives patients sort of a sense of closure and being able to do family planning potentially. For brain cancer, it does sometimes also change the way that we do actually treat cases. It can mean less surgeries. It can mean different types of treatments if there are any biomarkers that we're finding. So with IDH mutated tumors now, we do have the ability to actually give them IDH inhibitors, which is really new to the clinic. It's only approved by the end of last year. And hopefully, these types of algorithms will ensure that these patients can get on these types of treatments as quickly as possible, really making sure that they have the best chance of surviving as long as possible.
Yeah, it's absolutely life-changing and extremely necessary. So I think maybe we've only got time for one more question from me before we hand over to the Q&A session. So the last question that we had was if you could identify one area where the combination of, say, AI and supercomputing could create a major breakthrough in healthcare in the next 5 years, what would it be? Thomas, you look like you've got thoughts.
I'm happy to bite. Yeah. Gosh, look, there's so many, and so asking for one is very difficult. However, in our team, we're doing all sorts of things. We're improving the way we do our data science. I no longer have to walk past laptops screaming for weeks on end, just running one computation, and also like a data analyst who can't do anything for 3 weeks because they're waiting on a result. Now they have it in half an hour or less. I do really think that what is the biggest challenge in medicine for me is that over one's life, you accumulate so much health data. And all those things really should figure into the pretest probability of X, or the chance of this, or which of these 3 roughly equivalent treatments is going to be right for you. I think we've heard a lot about precision medicine over probably the last decade, roughly. But I think we're actually starting to really begin to have the tools to do that for individuals on scale. And so that's very exciting. It does, however, require a massively improved approach to healthcare data. I work in the GP setting half my time, and very frequently, I do not have a piece of paperwork from the hospital across the road, and I cannot get it other than by waiting a week for a form to go there and maybe come back. I certainly don't have information from interstate, and I don't even think about having information from overseas. Patients don't have data sovereignty over their own healthcare data. And to be honest, as a profession, we're somewhat unsure about that as well, because a lot of the attempts to give patients access to their data, for example, my health record, result in patients coming to me quite worried, saying, "I've got a report and it says, X, Y, and Z," and I say, "Oh, that just means normal," or that means we'll think about what's going on in 5 years' time. Because these documents are not written for patients. They're written, and they have a doctor's name at the top. They're addressed to that doctor. That's who's meant to read it. But the patient also has a very reasonable expectation that they have access to these things. So how do we change the way we produce, store, handle, format, present healthcare information in order to enable people to collect the information they require to back up the systems we're going to have in time to make the best possible decisions for them? I think it's a really big challenge, but also a really huge opportunity.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And I honestly hadn't thought about, you can access your blood test results on my health record now, but if you're not kind of savvy in that way, are you just going to become very anxious about this? I don't know, like, what does it all mean? It's not something I thought about at all. Shiv, Saskia, keen to get your thoughts also.
I wanted to just echo this. I think the greatest advantage that we have here with the use of supercomputers and driving sort of innovation in healthcare is the fact that we can store a huge amount of data together with having access to fabulous compute, whether that's in GPUs, CPUs, or quantum computing in the future. Because AI, I think people don't realize that AI, the algorithms are cool, the compute is cool, but what really drives a good AI algorithm is the data that you're putting in. And much like Thomas said, it's the quality of the data that we're currently storing, the way that we are, where we're putting it, how it's presented is often actually not optimal for these AI algorithms to learn. It's often very fragmented, siloed, and we could really do a better job there for really our patients in the end, because this will enable personalized medicine. So I think supercomputers can really drive us in that right direction by giving us that infrastructure we so desperately need, and pushing us probably also towards really thinking about, where is all your data? Have you thought about bringing it together into one place? What are your data formats? What do they need to look like? All of that good type of work that sounds really boring, but is actually the real challenge, rather than writing new algorithms.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you say, bioinformatics, garbage in, garbage out, but also it's really difficult. Maybe it's all handwritten notes, maybe it's in a poorly formatted Excel spreadsheet, and that's the single source of truth for this particular cohort. It's messy, and that aspect is in some ways the most difficult one, I would say.
It's literally a project we have running right now at Perth Hospital with 6,000 medical records, just to take mostly PDFs and turn them into something useful.
Yes.
That we can then go and use for inference or RAG, or apply other techniques to. And it's not particularly hard to do, but it would be so much better and so much more. We'd be so much more assured of the quality if it was actually structured and formatted in the right way at the point of entry, at the point of capture.
Yeah. And Shiv, do you have anything to add?
I think this increased usage of test time compute, which is like AI research on steroids. So what you do is it kind of innovates on its own, tests its hypotheses, comes up with a virtual solution. And I think we'll see a lot more of that. One example I wanted to give, like Saskia mentioned about AlphaFold 2. So what happened was a couple of years back, we had this TBI trial. TBI is what is traumatic brain injury. And what happens is, just like when you get hit on a hand, you get a swollen hand, right? But when you are hit on the head, so there's not much room for the tissue to grow. So what happens is there's a pressure fluid buildup, and the way they measure fluid is they insert a sensor inside your skull, and that can also cause hemorrhage. So to measure the brain pressure. So what we found was you can actually get off a virtual brain pressure signal from just the ECG. But that's kind of a new feature or a new discovery that's done by AI itself. But having that human knowledge base to justify such a translation, that's hard. So you would have more of these discoveries. And I think the bottleneck there is us humans trying to understand what's happening. Because now coding, for example, has gotten to a level that is generating code, which is actually so superior for us to understand. And 5 years from now, I think I wouldn't be surprised if you have more AlphaFold-like discoveries completely done by AI.
Wow.
Without any human in the loop.
It's really interesting. I don't want to take up too much of our time, but there's a book, Dodge or the Fall of Hell, I think it's called, by Neil Stephenson. Anyways, this is one of the things he talks about, that a human hasn't written any code at all for the last 30 to 50 years. And it's all basically AI generated, making some jokes about how it's all originally based on some nerd in the 80s writing something in Fortran. But it's an interesting read. So if you're looking for some strange sci-fi adventures, I definitely recommend that, because it actually touches on a lot of these topics, which is really, really interesting. Anyway, so
I just wanted to also answer what Pascal mentioned on the Teams chat about quantum and AI. I think, and FPGA specifically, I think there'll be AI agents. There'll be some amalgamation of AI as well as quantum. So, for example, if you have to apply that to a healthcare setting, you'd see all possible pathways a patient can take and what's the most likely pathway.
Yeah. So you think there'll be a marriage of this sort of quantum technology?
I think I'm not sure about quantum, but there's a new field called probabilistic computing, which is like a poor man's quantum computer, wherein you can actually get NP kind of solutions on an FPGA.
Okay, that's really interesting as well. So I was going to say, let's throw it open to the Q&A. So we've kind of touched on Pascal's question. Pascal, if you're still there, would you like to unmute and ask your question directly? I think everyone's sick of hearing me.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Oh, wait. My mic has done something funny. Okay. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Yeah.
I cannot hear you for some reason, but that's fine. I'm going to change it. Headphones working fine till my mic started. All right. Okay. So my question was about the new technologies, right? So the compute infrastructure, I guess the first question was actually about discussions in the community of HPC workflows, right? So if you've got some expertise here, we've built up a bunch of expertise in Perth, but I'd be curious if anybody, if there's been a lot of crosstalk about like how to get this to work, because it's not trivial to kind of like really scale up these workflows on HPC systems, or just generally even cloud resources, right? Talking about data accessibility, data privacy, the compute resources you need. Is there a real concerted effort to try to have conversations in this space at conferences and so on? Or is that still kind of in the beginning stages?
Yeah, I can answer that probably. So I think, like at least in the research space, right, we've been dealing with high performance compute for probably, I mean, when I started my career now, 15 years ago, I was using a cluster, so some sort of form of like a terrible high performance compute system. And then obviously we've scaled up and now we're using cloud and Pawsey and all of these much more much bigger systems, you know, the learning curve has been probably slow from researchers, and you know, we're not always the most well versed in how you know, how to most optimally use systems like Pawsey. And so there is definitely training required. I think, you know, it's become much easier because now we have things like ChatGPT where we can actually ask these questions that we probably, quite honestly, felt too embarrassed to ask previously. And there were also actually far too few people who could answer these questions. I think that was probably the biggest challenge, was finding someone who could confidently answer your weird question about whether, you know, how much, like how many GPUs you're going to need for this problem.
Yeah, that's so true.
I think there's a couple of interesting developments in this space. I think one is I was at Supercomputing 2024 in the US. A little interesting whether or not I'll go to 2025 given current events, we'll see. But Slurm, who produce or SCED-MD, who makes some software called Slurm, which is kind of like the software that schedules things on supercomputers, including on Photonics, have recently brought out Slinky, which is Slurm meets Kubernetes, which is basically focused around, well, I don't actually now just want to run a job once on the supercomputer. I actually want to do something all the time or frequently, or I want to do something when I need it. I want to do it just in time. And so definitely the global HPC community are working towards tooling that will let us, and this is focused on our sort of like a big in-one-place supercomputers, do work that integrates into these real-time workflows. At the same time, I think this is a great example of why we've done Merlin at Perth Hospital. Has several benefits for us. One, it's inside the institutional firewall, and that solves so many problems for us. It means we can send completely raw, completely identifiable information there and process it and work on it interactively in that environment. And we are really hoping that we'll get a health zone in Photonics sometime soon, and we'll see how that goes. But one of the things that we can do there is we can integrate closely with other systems. And we also do provide really user-friendly interfaces on that system. So you can just press a button and it opens RStudio for you. And if you're a data scientist, at that point, you should be pretty happy. But also, if you're not a data scientist, we have a button you can press and it opens something that looks a lot like ChatGPT, but runs entirely inside the hospital. And you can type in any question you want. And we will do things like provide all the hospital's policies as a data set within that system. So you can say, answer this question in relation to the hospital policies, including research policies. And I think we'll also eventually have it so you can say, answer this question in relation to all the grant applications we ever submitted as a team. Or answer this question in relation to this hospital record number. So by building those things locally, so I think we're going to see high-performance computing being on the edge as well. And we see a little bit of that. You know, they go, oh, you want a little bit of inference in your, I think, perhaps in things like fast food restaurants, for example, they might have a little bit of inference to work out where the bottleneck is in their workflow or something. But I think we're going to see a bit more slightly hardcore AI capability at the edge in healthcare as well.
Yeah, thanks. I guess my question is more like, because it's the health community, and not necessarily researchers, but I mean clinicians, just the health bureaucracy and so on. Are they kind of feeling like, oh yeah, this is a path that we really need to invest in and explore? Because the researchers honestly are well versed, right? But it's the larger landscape I was thinking of, just the health community. If you went to doctors and they would be like, yeah, someone in my team has got Hive and they run AI, and doctors chatting to other doctors in other health domains, talking about the actual use of agents, the actual use of integrating diagnostic tools in that context. I don't know if people here can answer that. That was sort of my question.
It's at every health conference I've been at in the last year. Every health conference I've been at in the last year, it's been a topic. I think there's still a little bit of FUD in that discussion, but there's definitely doctors telling each other what the advantages are. And I also know our health executives in our health systems in West Australia talking about it. I'm not sure they're necessarily ready to throw huge amounts of money in that direction, but they would really like the benefits. It's just if they're prepared to pay for it.
Yeah, I just want to add, like, I think just miraculously yesterday night I was having dinner with a couple of clinicians, like, early career clinicians, plus someone who's been working very recently still on those medical scribe AI techniques that we've heard about already. And I think doctors they're really aware that these things are coming, and that they are going to change their careers really fundamentally. And I guess, as with everything, and this is just mirrored in our society as well, is that there are very, very different opinions that people have, and that there's certainly also still a long way to what's actually making it acceptable for some of those clinicians that this is what is happening, and that it's just the same as everywhere else, I would say.
Actually, before we move on, Shiv, do you have anything else to add to that, or no?
Regarding this Pascal's second question on accessibility options for visually impaired, I think the way agents are moving now, it's like to each their own. So all that you have is some kind of backend data, and the way you want it to be visually visualized is, it depends on your tastes, and that's how it's going to be in future. So software as a service, as it currently stands, is going to be dead, I think, because the speed at which these agents are going, I think data is all that you need, and visualization is just a thing that you would want, the flavor that you want it in. And that's all built by AI.
So I'm curious, because the nominal things I've seen in terms of output, just because there's maybe not much training data for accessibility of websites, right? Most websites are not necessarily geared to trying to make sure that there's an easy button to click to translate all the text into an audio so people can listen if they're visually impaired, sensory feedback, and so on, right? So I imagine later on, right, you could actually have a few different things.
That's a big component in the user design. So the choice of colors to make it accessible to visually impaired. Sorry.
I think that was just some background chat in the office for Pascal's audio.
Correct.
Sounds like Basha. Yeah. So Shiv, please go on.
So I didn't get the second part of the question, Pascal.
I don't think Pascal said anything in particular. It
was
just,
I think so accessibility in those terms, highly customizable, and you're just a prompt away to change the design to what you need.
Okay. So I think we are now pretty much at time. So obviously there's a lot more that we could chat about, but just only have so many hours in the day, unfortunately. So thank you all so much.
Sarah, the event was is due to finish at 11:30.
Oh, is it? Okay. All right.
Yes.
So
amazing.
Karina, I think to your question,
Yep.
the biggest issue is research translation. So you build all these awesome models, but then you have HREC ethics, as well as educating the clinicians. So that's a big and change management. That's one of the biggest barriers that we face.
Yeah, so the question in the chat was, which are the barriers you have found on supercomputing uptake and the implementation of AI? I don't know if you, Thomas, or Saskia have a comment on that.
I'm happy to comment on that. I think in medicine, this kind of falls into software as a medical device frameworks. which are themselves reasonably new in the minds of most clinicians, and how we certify these systems for safety. We are familiar in medicine with not everything being perfectly safe. There is not any single medication, intervention, treatment, procedure, surgery, psychotherapy, counselling point, dietary intervention I can prescribe someone that has no risk at all. But we do find ways to sort of describe what the risk is. If you take this medication, there's a 13% chance that you're going to have nausea. And that generally it will settle down by itself, for example. And I think, certainly with things like medication, we're fairly comfortable about the kinds of things that we see as the risks associated with those interventions. There are whole new classes of risks associated with diagnostics and or other kinds of interventions that are provided by AI. New kinds of bias. Bias exists all across medicine, of course. It's nothing new, but new kinds of bias. Also risks around data sovereignty, but also sovereignty of almost our intellect as well. Should we import a set of model or a set of weights or a model from a different jurisdiction and apply it here? Will that model have the same level of understanding of, for example, First Nations health in this country? Difficult to say it will. Are we very good at First Nations health in this country in the first place? No. But are we better at it than someone who has not had the small content required about it in medical school? Hopefully, a little bit. So all sorts of interesting risks, and understanding those and explaining them both to clinicians and to the people who make decisions at the health service level, but also to our patients, and understanding when they're the right risks to take, because everything involves risk.
Yeah, similar. I think for the huge problem of the uptake of supercomputers is at the moment governance issues that we have with data, I think, and especially concerning probably has been changes in data privacy that the Australian government is enacting. We all know, we all want to keep data safe, and we do understand that this is sensitive data, that it's patient level data, and that we wouldn't want it to get out. And we are definitely striving towards that, right? We all are. But there are, I guess, limitations coming for us that will make this space much, much more challenging. Especially when we're talking about genomics data that is considered identifiable. That means we're going to have to work in much more restrictive environments. And unfortunately, our infrastructure might not be ready for that yet. And that will be investment that we need. If this is something the government wants us to do, and patients certainly want us to do, then it's the right thing to do. But there needs to be equivalent investment in those infrastructures so we can keep up with that demand.
And so I guess building on that question, or building on that comment, looking at the future of this type of sensitive data work, how do you think computing will need to evolve? What should we all be preparing for?
Encryption.
Encryption, yeah.
It's probably encryption, and from the Pawsey side, obviously, all your HIPAA, GRV, all of the acronyms, the ISOs, you want to be a certified institution. On the other hand, to ensure everyone that what is going on is super compliant with all the security standards that we will need to be compliant with for sensitive data.
Yeah, I think there's a few things that are going to happen. I absolutely agree with Saskia about there's going to need to be these secure zones in our large supercomputers that provide capability for this these advances. Fully homomorphic encryption is a path to this. My understanding is that currently to do fully homomorphic encryption for the kind of data sets and the kind of computations we're thinking about is a huge computational barrier. And the lesser forms of homomorphic encryption, personally as a clinician, don't quite cut the mustard for me yet, in my opinion. This is not necessarily something that's that brand new, though. I mean, there are supercomputers in the US that handle nuclear secrets. So If they can do it, we can too. I think some of those systems take pretty extreme measures, like they re-image every single node at the end of a job, and you can only look at the whole machine. There's lots of things that they do for that. But even in our team, we've contributed code to things like Open On Demand, which lets us lock down the way machines that you're using communicate with each other, and just assume that the network inside the supercomputer is hostile territory as well, because other jobs are running, for example. So there's a lot of work that can be done on some of the tooling out there to just have like a zero trust principle approach, and that can help, and that can take us a long way. I think I mentioned before on doing computation on the edge, but I think there's also a big opportunity to federate our computation as well. So I might have some data in my institution that I'm not sending anywhere else, and you might also have another. Let's say you're another children's hospital on the East Coast, and you have some data that you're not going to send to me, but you're prepared to send me the model weights, and I'm prepared to send you my model weights. And so we can do some computation, we can exchange weights, perhaps do some central processing somewhere external to both organizations, send the weights back, train further. And by providing like a little bit of compute here and here and here and here, we can develop then an output which combines the knowledge contained in those different data sets into one more generalized output. And so I think that's an exciting development. It's enabled by things like access federations, like Australian Access Federation. And so I've been encouraging the health department to get on board with that, to provide a bit of a policy and a technical background to how we do those exchanges and those authentications across institutions securely. So there's lots of work to enable these advances that is needed, but is happening bit by bit.
Yeah. So it's not only, I guess, to distill that, it's obviously places like Pawsey having these secure compute zones, but also having these, health level changes as well, so that you can have frameworks in place for this type of thing, because it can be a little bit new and scary to be sending your data somewhere else, right? A lot of the conversations we've had with health is we're not really ready for this type of thing yet, but it's great to hear that you're pushing more and more.
There's also an opportunity for organisations like Pawsey to do some outreach as well, to say, well, here's our model of what compute on your site looks like that integrates with our site in this way. Or, yes, we will do a VPN with you for transit of the data that you are prepared to send to us, and standardise that and say, well, look, if Queensland and WA and Victoria, can agree on something that's the same, then that really helps us to provide assurance to all the different stakeholders that we manage in the health system about this as well.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Shiv, see you've unmuted.
So we've been using fully homomorphic encryption from our TBI times, if you remember, Sarah.
Yes.
But the issue with fully homomorphic is not all modalities of data fit and train well, because there's a huge computational overhead. And with federated, the issue is you need kind of very powerful computers on every site in order to exchange weights. But end-to-end encryption, which is also, because it's not just AI that's taking off, you also have quantum. I wish Pascal stayed for a little longer. So you also want to make quantum resistant AI, wherein you're future-proofing your machine learning models. But also regarding what Thomas mentioned, SAMD, software as a medical device. So the guidance you get from TGA, which is like the authority that regulates whether you can use AI or any other calculation device in your workflow, is you can't have anything that you can't write on a paper and calculate as a medical device. So there's a long way in terms of regulation also that needs to happen, and because TGA is pretty slow, and the reason that I was told is that there's not much of staff retention. They leave, so they take the knowledge with them. But that compared to what people do in FDA, so if you have a device or an AI product, So they work with you to get this to patients. So so even the processes in getting accreditation should change. And something else that Thomas mentioned is also something we experienced in Hive. So when we originally set up Hive, the patient data that the machine learning models were trained on were on US cohort. So we have a totally different dynamic here with respect to First Nations people, like what Thomas mentioned. And we had, when we started Hive, there's lots of false positives on the original model. So we had to fine tune them and get on, and you don't get data like immediately. So had to wait for a couple of years, and then now it's showing promise.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. Yeah, it does sound like there's a decent amount of regulatory change to both influence but keep up with to really get this working, I guess, in the longer term. While we've got you on the floor, Shiv, I would be really interested if you could share some more about the kind of most impactful AI or ML-driven projects you've implemented or are currently implementing, and hear about some of the real-world outcomes.
So, and I think of Pawsey, you have on his list of projects that benefited from Pawsey, from COVID linkage. I mean, if you remember those days, real-time linkage of patients whenever someone's checked into a hotel quarantine facility, and we had it run on Pawsey. And the TBI project was good. But what we are working on now is pretty. It's the thing that you see in my hand. That's what is a radar chip. So there've been a couple of suicides in Bentley psychiatric ward. So you can't have video cameras. You can't have like a wearable because of risk of self-harm. So what we're developing now is what uses Wi-Fi and radar to kind of measure heart and respiratory rate of patients. So there's no contact, non-invasive. And you can have multiple people in a room, and you can solve the problem of cocktail party problem, wherein so everyone talks to everyone else. So you can actually uniquely segregate waveforms of patients. So this is something that we've been working on recently.
Wow.
And this comes from the coroner's office to actually measure vitals of patients non-invasive. Apart from that, I have like statistics of real savings because of this Hive model. So gave this to a statistician, like from a company, and they reckon there's like 500 bed days saved in ICU in the
500 bed days
in the ICU, and hospital readmissions were dropped to 10%. By 10%. So there's a lot of statistics that actually show that intervention. So you intervene before a deterioration event happens. That's much more productive. And also, I mean, so the other project that we are working on is end of life, which is like you predict a patient's mortality in 1 year. So you give that choice to the patient whether to go through a rigorous treatment regime and still die, or you could, I mean, you can just leave the treatment and spend time with the family.
Yeah.
So
I mean, that's incredibly powerful, empowering patients, right, to make those choices in an informed way. Very powerful, very tangible for, real people and their families. That's incredibly important.
Yes.
That's incredible. That's like three or four things out of what I know is quite a few other projects, as we're talking about other various bits and pieces as well that you've done over the years.
But a lot of it also is because of Pawsey. I mean, we won't get that kind of compute anywhere.
Yeah, well, that's great to hear. And of course, we're really delighted to be supporting all of these types of healthcare projects. Like, why I still work at Pawsey is because I can see the real impact it can have on people if you're able to provide this support in a good way. So it's, yeah, very rewarding, I would say. And so, Thomas, in pediatric medicine specifically, how has access to advanced computing changed what's possible in your field over the past 5 years, do you think?
I think there's a few things that's happening. I think one of the interesting things about pediatric research in particular, and I'll focus a little bit on the research side of things, that is exciting is our approach to data. We often have pretty difficult data collection challenges in pediatric populations, and we have because if you say, oh, we really want to get a follow-up blood test, for example, the kid might say, I don't want one. And we'll say, okay, fine. So we have quite a lot of missing values in some of our data sets. And I think the approach to this has changed over the last 5 to 10 years, where we used to, once upon a time, we used to just exclude all the cases that we didn't have a full data set for. And then we realized that was a systematic bias. And then we were doing, like all intention to treat analyses and all case analyses, but then you have to choose statistics which can handle missing values. But also those missing values are still a systematic bias in the areas where they're missing. And one thing our team's been using more recently is imputation. So where you fill in the missing values with what's most probably there. The techniques for this can be really computationally expensive, and you often have to run them, like 100 times or something like that. And this is one of those examples where I used to walk past just laptops on desks screaming all night, all day for days on end running these computations. And you can imagine that when you're doing that, there's not a lot of iteration by your data science team occurring there. So we've managed to solve that by just throwing a lot more cycles at solving these problems really rapidly. But also because we have access to GPUs, both at Pawsey and on site, there are new approaches to this same problem where you impute not by running huge, long, complex chained equations, but by using ML models. And we're evaluating those for our research purposes as well to see if they better meet our needs. One of the things that is really key about pediatric medicine is that it's about communication plus, and not just with the patient, but with the family. The family is really important. You have a really strong advocate for the patient in the family and a really helpful person who can check on things, do things, get things done, even when the patient can't. But also families and parents bring their own set of worries, concerns, needs for information, etc. It was mentioned briefly before, sort of the healthcare workforce challenges of not having enough people to do all this work. And for us, it's not enough people to do all this communication sometimes. And so generative AI provides opportunities to assist with that communication. Now, we're still pretty, some people might call us conservative. Well, we say we're very caring in our approach to this, and we like to make sure there's still a human in the loop. And that opens up a whole bunch of really interesting human-computer interaction problems that sort of border on computer science and psychology for how do you integrate generative AI models and clinicians such that they can care for a patient effectively, safely, without devaluing the clinician, but also without turning them into a yes person. And so these are really interesting and occasionally quite sort of wicked problems to solve as well, to make sure that we can add to what people can deliver, to multiply their effectiveness, their skill, their knowledge, their experience, and keep the care that each patient, each child, each family receives personalized as well.
Wow, yeah, it's never just a technical issue, is it? There's always something else.
For me, the practice of medicine is very much still about. I think the word patient carries a lot of weight for me, in that it means that I care about you, and you trust that I'm going to help you, and it's actually a relationship rather than a transaction.
Yeah, and arguably that's how it should be, right? Like you want to have that type of ongoing trusted relationship with a person that's really making huge important decisions in your care and your life. So it's quite important, clearly. So we are actually towards the end now. Sorry about getting the timing wrong before. So I'm very grateful to all of you for this really interesting conversation. It's been very, very interesting. And since the 2 and 3 of you live in Perth, we should all get together at Pawsey and have another deep dive with maybe some coffee and some snack. But in the meantime, I'd be really interested to get from all of you a brief final thought on what you think is the most important thing for advancing this intersection of, AI, HPC, and healthcare. For sort of 30-second closing thought, which will probably be longer than 30 seconds, but that's okay. Do you want to go first, Thomas, since you're already...
I can. I think the most important thing we need to do in the next year or two is teach, across all professions, so, all workers really, but in my field, clinicians, to be prepared to pull back the covers on AI, to understand it, to work out how it's working and what it can do for them, not to be scared, but to have the appropriate level of skepticism, and therefore through that understanding be able to integrate it into the care we deliver in a really quality way.
Shiv?
I also agree with Thomas. I think education is very essential, and it's not just that, but also informing the execs above you on what is coming, because that influences the policy decisions that's for the whole hospital and community.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Saskia?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Those 2 things are probably the most important. They are, whether it's a clinician, a researcher, or anyone else living in modern life.
Right. So yeah, with that, I guess we can wrap it up. So again, thank you, and thanks to our audience, in particular Pascal, for interesting questions. Pascal always asks a lot of great questions. So here at Pawsey, we're very committed to supporting Australia's healthcare innovation through our computing infrastructure, but also through training and, if we can, advocacy. So we're definitely keen to have an ongoing conversation around these things and see how we can help you. But also, if you're interested in learning more about how Pawsey can, support your work, you can reach out to us through email at help@pawsey.org.au. You can also get in touch with me. And so a recording of today's session will be available on our YouTube channel within the next few days. And thank you again, all of you, for joining us. And we look forward to continuing this important conversation as it keeps evolving in Australia. Thanks a lot.